You're about to view an episode of Sites on EdTech, Zanichelli Venture's interview series with people from the education technologies world. I'm your host, Luigi Morino, and in this episode, I interviewed Jamie Poskin, founder and CEO of TeachFX, an app that captures and analyzes teachers' classroom instruction to produce insights about classroom discourse patterns. By revealing key insights about teachers' own teaching, TeachFX empowers them to reach their fullest potential. Here is the interview. I'm very happy to have Jamie with us today. Thanks for being here, Jamie.
Of course, my pleasure.
So could you tell us, what is TeachFX?
TeachFX is an app that teachers use. They record their classes with our app, and then we use voice AI to measure the student engagement, the equity of voice, and sort of the discourse patterns and dynamics of their classroom in order to provide that teacher with targeted feedback, pedagogical feedback on their teaching. So it's very similar to what an instructional coach or a principal might do for a teacher, but we do it all with the magic of voice AI.
Oh, wow, this is very interesting. So how does it work? How do teachers get feedback, for example?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. In the in-person classroom, they are recording their class, usually with their iPhone or Android phone, sometimes with their computer. And then we also have a product that works through Zoom and Microsoft Teams for the virtual classroom, where if you're recording your Zoom class, you automatically get TeachFX feedback. And that actually is another product that we recently started offering, which is more for institutions that do online learning, like online synchronous universities or colleges, for example, where we actually provide a business intelligence layer for every classroom environment that they're doing across an entire learning institution.
Okay, wow. So there's no hardware installation involved.
No, it's, you know, I'm a former teacher. I used to teach math and English at a high school in Harlem, and you know, early on, I sort of felt like if this is going to work, if teachers are really going to record their own classes in order to get better, it has to be pretty darn seamless with what they're doing. So we took that as a design principle early on. It needs to work with whatever hardware is already in the classroom.
Okay, wow. And how about the virtual version, the integration with Zoom or other platforms? How did that come about?
I mean, it came about during the pandemic. So it's actually kind of an interesting story. So, you know, the pandemic hits, and all of our customers, you know, all of our districts and schools we work with are going virtual. And we were thinking, well, how can we best serve them? So we had some work we were doing on integrating our tool with Zoom and Teams and some of these other platforms, and that was great. But what we realized in doing that integration work was that this new opportunity presented itself, which is we could sort of passively analyze everything on their Zoom account. And, you know, we could still do that in a way that protected teacher privacy. That's a big value of ours, is that, you know, this data is for the teachers. It's for us to improve. So we could collect all that data, but then surface kind of trends in a macro aggregated way that allowed districts to see, at least in US K-12, really, it was all about equity of voice. So we called this initiative Equitable Classrooms. We provided it for free to our partners. And we did this analysis of who's speaking. Is, you know, are African-American students speaking at the same rate as white students, males, females? How is it changing based on grade level or based on subject area? I mean, we could look at all sorts of dimensions based on academic performance. So we did this big study during the 2020-2021 school year. And then we realized that, well, this product, you know, has a lot of application outside of K-12. As K-12 schools went back in person, we started getting a lot of inbound interest from companies and organizations and schools that do virtual synchronous learning, and always have, even before the pandemic. So now that's our, you know, as a business, that's sort of our fastest growing revenue segment by a mile, is the sort of business intelligence layer for online synchronous learning.
Okay, wow. So how did the tech of doing that, of rolling that out, actually work? I mean, the virtual platform integration.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty straightforward to do the integration, but what we realized was on Zoom or in any kind of virtual environment, you're dealing with multiple microphone streams, right? Whereas in an in-person class, a teacher using it on their phone, you got the one microphone. It's not necessarily bad quality audio, but it's not as robust as what you're getting on Zoom. So the transcription is a higher quality, and it just allows our ML engineers had a field day with this new data because you're able to do so much more. So we could do a lot more with NLP, natural language processing, because the transcription quality was so much higher. We could do more with, like I mentioned, equity of voice. So even if a student only says one word during the whole class, we know, which Zoom microphone that came from. So we can aggregate that up and say how much that student spoke over the year, or, that demographic group. So it made a lot of things possible that in the in-person classroom would have been a lot harder to do.
Yeah, right. So in the previous version, how were you getting data about the students? I suppose with a microphone being closer to the teacher data might have been easier to collect, whereas the student data, you can do vocal recognition, of course, but to what extent is this a great improvement in the change into virtual, and how was it working before?
Yeah, I mean, our insights are really focused on trying to help a teacher change the way they teach for the better, right? And so in both the virtual and in-person classroom, the focus really is on what did I do as a teacher that got students engaged, or that worked pedagogically speaking. So that's the same. I think the advantage of the virtual classroom in terms of just allowing us to do more is, like I said, in having more granular data about every single word that's spoken by a student. We still are able to tell teachers in the in-person classroom when their students are speaking and who, and the equity of voice. But in the virtual environment, we can then map that on this sort of more aggregated level across, hundreds of thousands of class recordings in a district. And that data is incredibly powerful, because if you're saying, hey, look, in our district, English learners are speaking at 1/3 the rate of non-English learners, that's a huge problem. That's looking at the root causes of the supposed achievement gaps between those groups. And it allows you to actually target your professional learning and target the change you want to see as a district into what really is going to move the needle on this thing that you care about. So yeah, I think that's really the biggest difference.
Have there been governmental or nonprofit organizations seeking this data from you to actually inform their interventions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been partnering with a number of nonprofits and sort of research institutions. I mean, most recently, the Gates Foundation, we received a grant from them to essentially provide feedback to tutors. So they're really focused on math and particular vulnerable populations. And they see tutoring. I mean, they've seen the research. Tutoring is a very effective intervention, but it's, how do you provide high quality tutoring, and how do you ensure that tutoring is high quality at scale? So that's what our grant is for, is like, how do we make sure that these tutors are teaching in a pedagogically effective way? So that's one example. I mean, we also work with, I went to grad school at Stanford, at the Graduate School of Education, and we have a number of researchers there that are looking at our data, both just to, I mean, we've collected such a massive amount of data during the pandemic, and districts are interested to know more than what we've reported on. So we're working with folks at Stanford on that. And yeah, I mean, it's a big part of what we do, is trying to understand what makes great teaching and how to change teacher practice.
Yeah, you mentioned the Gates Foundation, and amongst the initiatives that they've supported, the most notable in the EdTech world probably is Khan Academy, one of the precursors of the EdTech world. Now, I want to link to this, because you also mentioned synchronous learning, and there are many platforms that are specializing in asynchronous learning. Your tool is a tool that is specific to synchronous learning. Is your tool being integrated with other EdTech companies that provide asynchronous learning with synchronous parts within it, and for that part, then they use TeachFX?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a big founding principle of our work is just the central importance of student voice to learning and dialogue to learning. I mean, students need to be able to speak with each other and with their instructor in order to best learn. And the research on this is really unequivocal, right? So if you think about the macro trends in EdTech and virtual learning, really virtual learning 1.0 was pretty much all asynchronous. And that type of learning can work for certain learners, right? If you're already very capable of being self-directed and all this kind of stuff, then that can work really well for you. But it's not the best way to learn. The best way to learn is dialogically, right? And so I think what we're seeing now, really in the last 4 or 5 years, and the pandemic has accelerated it incredibly, is like virtual learning 2.0 is synchronous. And people are realizing that that's a much more powerful way to learn. And so, yeah, like every class, even in-person classes, have synchronous and asynchronous components, right? If you're an English teacher, you say, go read chapter 6, and then we'll come and talk about it. So that's there, that you have both in any learning environment. But what we're really about is, hey, the synchronous learning environment is where you're spending all your money, right? I mean, it's where you have all these people together. It's you're paying people, whether you're a school district paying a teacher or whatever. That's the high leverage and high cost time, and we want to make sure that you're getting the very, very most out of that time.
Yeah, I agree that synchronous learning has still a big part to play in education, and there's a lot of research backing the social brain in education. How is it triggered? It's triggered by, of course, interaction with other humans. Then again, I do believe that this growing blend of asynchronous and synchronous learning is a huge potential, both in lowering the costs of education and
it always has to be a blend. I mean, like no learning format is purely synchronous. I mean, that would be crazy. It's like you could, I guess, there could be some types of learning, like if you were in a dance class or something, maybe it would all be synchronous. But yeah, like for the most part, so much of learning does happen asynchronously, but then those synchronous moments are really pivotal in the learning journey.
Do you believe there's a different breakdown for in asynchronous and synchronous learning for different age groups? And by the way, I did not ask you, do you work with which age groups do you work with?
Really the whole spectrum, from preschoolers to adults. I mean, most of our business is in K-12, so kindergarten through 12th grade, but we have university partners. We have partners in, adult learning spaces. So yeah, it really, it's funny, the same pedagogical principles that apply to kindergartners also apply in adult learning. The idea that you need to process your thoughts verbally. It's powerful for 5-year-olds and 50-year-olds.
Intuitively, though, one would expect that kindergartens probably need synchronous learning to a greater extent than adults do. Do you agree with
I think that's probably right. I mean, need is an interesting word in that sentence, because it's like, well, yeah, I think somebody who has, a graduate degree and is very, they don't need to have, they could learn something by reading the Wikipedia, right? Whereas obviously a kindergartner can't learn something by reading the Wikipedia. They need interactivity. So I think need is the operative word. Like, what do you need? I think, how do you learn best? Like, it's going to be a blend for everybody. And I don't know enough. I mean, there is research that shows that as kids get older, their teachers talk more and more. And I don't think that's a good thing. I don't, right? So I think that our middle schools and high schools would really benefit from having a more student-centered dialogical classroom. And that's part of what we're, helping school districts see.
Let's zoom a little into this.
Yeah.
How have teacher behaviors in the classroom changed once you've provided them with insights?
Well, that's been the most surprising and rewarding part of this journey for me, because, I embarked on this company thinking we need a way to measure what really matters. I did not think that measuring it would have such an impact on the data itself. So we have seen that teachers make huge changes to their pedagogy. They almost double their student talk once they've used our tool about 10 times. So you see these strong correlations to, the more they, even using the tool once or twice, you'll see a bump. And then the more they use it, the more it grows. And that persists for long periods of time. I mean, basically since we've existed as a company. We also have we've done more robust research. So we have a number of different insights that we provide. One of the insights we provide is about the pedagogical concept of uptake, where it's, are you as a teacher building linguistically on student responses? So this is like one example.
And can you explain that a little better?
Oh, yeah, sure. So the sort of, like, are you revoicing what the student said in your response to it? Or are you helping guide their thinking in some kind of way? Okay. So a simple way to think about it is, are you as a teacher building on the student contribution? Or are you just saying, great, thank you, and then ask, whatever? Like, are you actually taking what they said and making sense of it, or taking it into a new place so that the student feels included in the conversation?
Wow. Okay, so you're able to extract the data on how much teachers actually use uptake as a technique in their classrooms.
Exactly right. So we might say, hey, you used uptake 7 times in your class, and here are the 7 times, and you can listen to those. Well, we ran we didn't run it. Stanford and some of the professors we partnered with there ran a large-scale randomized controlled trial experiment with just this insight to see what impact it had on instructors in a class that had over 1,000 instructors. Okay, and they randomized it by sending some teachers a nudge to go look at this data about uptake, and some teachers didn't get the nudge. And what they found is that the teachers who got the nudge used uptake 24% more than teachers who didn't. And not only that, but the students rated their professors higher and said this class was better. They're more likely to recommend the class if their professor had randomly been receiving these nudges. So we have seen like very clear and compelling evidence that this, both in sort of our observation of our own data, but also in randomized control trial by external parties, that this data has a huge impact on teacher behavior, a huge positive impact at really an incredibly cheap cost compared to the other effective ways to influence teacher behavior are like instructional coaching. Well, instructional coaching is like pretty expensive. You have a human being in the back of your classroom like every week. This is obviously several orders of magnitude cheaper than that, but it has this clear demonstrable impact.
Yeah, are uptakes the most practical example of a kind of nudge that has impacted behavior the most, or are there other simple examples that you can provide?
We do a lot of qualitative interviews with teachers, and I think the simplest, most effective is the talk ratio. So just a teacher seeing, oh my God, I spoke 88% of class, and that's just way more than I ever thought, and I don't want that. So I think just that overall talk ratio has a big impact psychologically. We also look at the types of questions teachers are asking. So are they asking open-ended questions and how many closed questions, and just the number of questions overall? And I think that is very actionable, right? It's like, oh, I asked 48 questions, but only 2 of them were open-ended.
Yeah.
Those are very actionable things. And so when you give somebody actionable feedback, they tend to improve. So those are just a couple examples. Wait time is another one. I don't, if you're familiar with the pedagogical concept of wait time, it's just after you ask a question as a teacher, it benefits your students to provide some silence before you allow a student to respond. so that every student has a chance to like think about what the answer might be and process before they have to listen to somebody, another student. And then also wait time too, which is after a student says something, as a teacher, you don't want to just be like, that's correct. Like, thank you for, you want to have every other student like listen, think about it, like before you step in as a teacher, and maybe another student would respond if you don't step in. So those are like simple, like wait time is a very simple thing to do. Like you just have to be quiet in order to enact wait time, but it has these huge benefits. I mean, Mary Bud Rowe, the researcher who studied wait time originally, she showed like 11 different benefits of using wait time. And so you get these benefits with this very small change in your own behavior as a teacher.
Have you found any hesitations on behalf of teachers in high schools, in universities, or in whatever setting?
Of course. Yeah, I mean, it's anytime you're asking someone to look in the mirror and think and self-reflect, you're going to have some people who are hesitant. On the other hand, I think most teachers we work with are very eager for feedback. I mean, I was a high school teacher and I taught math and English, and my English classes were never observed by another adult my entire teaching career. Like, I didn't get a lot of feedback. As teachers in general, they don't get a ton of feedback, right? And when they do have someone in their classroom, it's usually part of an evaluation. It's a little bit, there's some degree of like labor management stuff going on. It's not totally it's not totally for my own development. So we've mostly seen teachers really embrace it. I think the hesitancy comes from, number one, just, I know I could be better, but I don't really want to think about it. Not the teacher I want to be in my idealized version. And then, there's also just fear that this is going to be used against them in some way. And, we have a pretty strong viewpoint on that, which is, hey, this is your data as a teacher. We will, this is not accessible by your admin. They don't even have admin don't even have an account. Like, this is a teacher tool and the teacher owns their data. That's our philosophy in K-12, but you always have some paranoid folks that are worried about that. I mean, it's okay because it's like the vast majority are usually very embracing of it, and those people come around eventually.
I was talking to Monica Katkut from Teachers Lead Tech a few weeks ago, and her experience with upskilling, providing services to upskill teachers was that initially there needed to be some extent, some level of coerciveness in convincing teachers. But when they saw the impact that this had on their teaching and on their students, they would become advocates of using the instruments,
That's interesting. We've always said we are not going to partner with you, school district, unless this is totally voluntary. So we've been pretty dogmatic, pretty strict on that. But there is a side of me that thinks like, man, because what we see is once a teacher uses our tool one time, they usually are converted. They're like, oh my gosh, this is really cool. So there's a part of me which is like, man, what if we, could we, I mean, coerce is a pretty strong word, but could we set an expectation, or could the principal set an expectation that like, hey, I expect you to use this at least once. It's totally private. If you don't like it, you don't have to do it again. Just because we know that once people use it once, they tend to find it incredibly valuable. It's something we've thought about, but so far we've been pretty like, I mean, we're all teachers. Like our company's like half teacher, like half the company's ML engineers and half the company's teachers. So
I think I had used the word coerce in my question, and Monica had answered somewhat more like strongly nudging them rather than
right. Yeah, we don't even do that. We provide a warm invitation.
Yeah. So regarding all the work that you do with teachers, I suppose that business-wise, what makes most sense is to not have like personal report direct with teachers, apart for when you're doing some research. But I might be getting this wrong. Is there actually a part of the service that implies your staff connecting directly with the teachers on field?
Yeah, we do that. I mean, that's part of what we offer. It's when we work with a K-12 school, we have a professional learning team that will help that school work on whatever their priorities are. And we help them use the TeachFX data to achieve those priorities.
Sorry for the businessy question, but doesn't this raise costs quite substantially?
Compared to what it's, compared to what schools are used to paying for, it's just so much cheaper because, I should say so much more inexpensive because it's, instead of having one coach that you pay a full-time salary coaching 5 teachers, and so you're paying whatever, $20K per teacher, with a tool like ours, you're having our team come in for an hour 4 or 5 times a year. And that person is able to coach essentially your entire school because the tool is doing all the time, the time burdensome work. So yeah, it's a little bit, more costly for us to have someone manage the relationship and to provide this professional learning. But compared to, the old way, the pre-TeachFX way, it's like 100 times, 1,000 times more cost effective because you can do one-to-many and you don't have to have a person in the room every single time to provide the feedback.
And what do you think is the greatest value added of this personal relationship? Is it the encouragement that your staff can provide, or is it know-how in how to implement and make some changes, or is it anything else?
It depends. I mean, in some places it's the know-how. I think that in most places there are teachers who kind of know how to engage students, but it's really more about like making that conversation the focus of the work of teachers rather than all the other stuff that gets in the way of that. I think a big part of it is just in K-12 education, using voice AI to get automated feedback is like a radically different way to do things than the status quo. And so you just sort of need a guide to show you how to do it. Like, all right, how do I mean, it's not like our app is easy to use. You just press a button and that's not what I mean. But like, okay, so I have this data and now we're going to bring it into our professional learning community meeting and we're going to talk about it. Like, what's a good way to do that? It's like, we need to sort of guide them through that process a little bit so that they can understand how to do this new way of teacher learning.
Yeah. I suppose that should help with Rollout as well. By the way, speaking about Rollout, what are your rollout strategies? What are your marketing strategies?
You mean in terms of like top of funnel, if you will?
Do you target districts, school districts? Do you target single schools? How do you reach out to them? There are some viewers who don't know the US system too well, so
right. So the US system is very fragmented, I think is one way to say it. So we'll target both individual schools and districts. So far, most of our growth has been driven by starting at a school level and then having tremendous success with that school, and then a district wanting to go broader or more district wide with it. So yeah, we haven't done, honestly, we just hired our first marketing hire. Her first day was on Monday, so 2 days ago. So we haven't honestly done very much like by way of marketing. I think most of our leads come in organically through some of the research we've published, some of the, call it content marketing, like we have some partners that have written about their experience working with us and had that published in Learning Forward or ASCD or some of these other highly respected journals. So people learn about us through that, and then they come to us. So we're really at the very early stages of that. We obviously could do a lot more in terms of marketing.
Can you tell me a little bit, a brief history of TeachFX, like business-wise? How did it grow? When did it start?
Yeah, so it started. So like I said, so really it started in 2006 when I was teaching and I was thinking about feedback and all this stuff. But the actual start was when I was in grad school. So this is 2016. And I'm doing some research on, why teachers leave was this sort of research question that I was starting with. And I was interviewing this principal and I was talking about just some idea about, well, it'd be so cool if you could celebrate the positive moments that happened in class somehow by maybe videoing them or something. And this principal said, yeah, video is great, but it doesn't solve my big problem. And I was like, my ears kind of perked up. I was like, what's your big problem? He's like, well, it's time. Like, I could watch video of a teacher in my pajamas, and that's awesome. It's more convenient than having to be there at the same time. But like, I still have to watch the video. You're at Stanford, he said. Couldn't you just like run the video or the recording through some kind of like fancy computer and then basically do my job for me? He said, provide would be helpful. And at the time, in my mind, I thought, sir, teaching is an art form. Metrics? What do you mean by metrics about like, what does that even mean? So I asked him, well, can you clarify what you mean by metrics? And he said a lot of the things that our app does now, which is like, well, when are they asking open-ended questions versus closed questions? What's the talk ratio? What's the, are students is the teacher always responding to students, or do students ever talk to each other? Like student one and then student two responds to student one. And these kind of dynamics that were more objective and backed by the pedagogical research. And I just was like, that is really interesting. And yes, I am at Stanford. And yes, there are fancy computers here. I got to find somebody that knows more about that than I do. So that was really the birth of the idea. And, I talked a lot about it with my advisor at Stanford, the professor David Brazer, who, was really excited by the idea. He's a former principal researcher on, changing teacher behavior. And so I did a bunch of interviews. That's kind of where everything got started. And, David eventually left Stanford to join TeachFX. Yeah. And then in terms of like so we really started the company. I started the company in 2017 after I finished my grad program. And then we raised a seed round over several tranches over the next couple of years. And I don't know. What else do you want to know?
Yeah. What stage are you at now? How many people are in your team?
Yeah, we're, I think, 18 people now. We're at about 2 million of annually recurring revenue. So still seed stage, but perhaps thinking about raising our next round pretty soon here.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And while you were explaining how you work with all kind of customers, universities, schools, kindergartens, I couldn't help but think, gosh, I wish there was a tool such as TeachFX in Europe while I was at university or whatnot. Are you outside the US at all?
We are. We've had a lot of inbound, especially recently. I think I mentioned this Gates grant that we received. We have some other tutoring companies in Europe and the UK that we're talking with. And we have some schools outside the US that we work with in the UK and South America. So yeah, we do have some international footprint, but it's mostly just been if someone comes to us inbound, we'll obviously talk to them. But we're beginning to think more intentionally about our strategy just because the inbound is getting to be more and more.
Wow. Okay. I'm really looking forward to that then. Just to wrap up and conclude, what's coming up for TeachFX? Is there anything I should keep an eye for? Is it this international expansion?
Yeah, perhaps. To me, the real thing that's happened just in the last 2 months is, I mentioned it earlier, but taking the product that we built that we call for K-12, it was called Equitable Classrooms, that sort of, passive business intelligence layer that analyzes all your classes across your entire ecosystem. That's more for business leaders. What's really next for us is rolling that out. That's our, I mentioned we're at about 2 million ARR in K-12. We're almost at 1 million ARR for that business. So, and that's just really in the last 2 months. So I think if you talk to me a year from now, I'd imagine that'll be an even bigger part of what we do. is working with other ed tech companies that do basically anywhere where online synchronous learning is happening. We want to be the business intelligence layer for your company, and we want to be providing your instructors with feedback so that they're creating the most engaging classrooms possible.
Definitely, definitely. Do you work with other languages aside from English?
Yeah, in fact, our tool works in every language.
Wow.
And even our NLP, I mean, we're like, it's not to get too technical, but we used an unsupervised approach. So yes, we can, our uptake insight, even though it's very linguistically based, can work in Spanish or Italian or whatever language.
And is the platform such that teachers can read the feedback in their native language?
Yeah, they can.
Wow, awesome. So I'm really looking forward to seeing all of this being rolled out and how the development is gonna keep unfolding. I'm really interested to monitor this. Thanks a lot for being with me today, Jamie.
Well, thank you. It's been great. It's been fun to chat.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Goodbye now.
All right, take care.